The crack of thunder split the night sky, and Preston Warner's hand instinctively moved to the pistol at his hip before he realized it was just a storm rolling across the Colorado plains. He pushed open the door of his small ranch house near Julesburg, squinting through the rain that had started falling in sheets, checking on the horses one last time before turning in. Something felt wrong, though, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck that 28 years of living had taught him never to ignore. The barn door stood slightly ajar, swaying in the wind, and he knew for certain he had latched it tight before supper. Preston grabbed his oil lantern from the hook by the door and pulled his hat lower against the rain. The year was 1878, and the frontier was still wild enough that an open barn door could mean horse thieves, drifters, or worse. His boots squelched through the mud as he made his way across the yard, the lantern light dancing shadows across the weathered wood of his stable. He pushed the door open slowly, the rusted hinges groaning in protest. The horses nickered softly in their stalls, restless from the storm but not panicked. That was his first clue that whatever had disturbed his barn was not there to harm the animals. Preston raised the lantern higher, casting light into the corners of the stable. That was when he saw her. A woman huddled in the far corner behind a stack of hay bales, soaked to the bone and shivering. Her dress was torn and muddy, her dark hair plastered to her face. But what struck Preston most was not her bedraggled appearance but the way she held herself. Despite clearly being terrified, she had positioned herself with her back to the wall, a pitchfork clutched in her white-knuckled hands, pointed directly at him. "Stay back," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling of her body. "I do not want trouble, but I will defend myself if I must." Preston slowly raised his free hand, keeping the other holding the lantern low and non-threatening. "Easy now. This is my barn, my property. I am not going to hurt you, miss, but I would appreciate knowing who is sheltering in my stable." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes taking in every detail of his face, his stance, his weapons. Preston could see her making calculations, weighing her options. The intelligence in her gaze impressed him, as did the fact that she did not lower the pitchfork even though she had to be exhausted. "My name is Margaret Wilson," she finally said. "I escaped from a wagon train 3 days ago. The man I was supposed to marry tried to force himself on me when we stopped for the night. When I fought him off, he told everyone I had stolen from him and that I was dangerous. I have been running ever since." The words came out in a rush, as if she expected him not to believe her. Preston had seen enough of the world to know that men did terrible things, and then blamed their victims. He also recognized the desperation in her voice, the kind that came from being pushed to the very edge of what a person could endure. "You can put the pitchfork down," Preston said quietly. "I believe you, and you are safe here." Margaret's eyes searched his face again, looking for any sign of deception. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she slowly lowered the makeshift weapon, though she kept it within reach. As soon as she released the tension she had been holding, her body seemed to collapse in on itself. She slumped against the wall, wrapping her arms around herself. "Thank you," she whispered. Preston hung the lantern on a nail and shrugged off his oilskin coat. He approached slowly, telegraphing his movements, and held it out to her. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. Come up to the house. I have a fire going and hot coffee." "I cannot impose," Margaret said, but her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely get the words out. "You are not imposing. You are accepting help from someone who is offering it freely. Now come on before we both freeze out here." He turned his back on her deliberately, giving her privacy and space, and walked toward the barn door. After a moment, he heard her footsteps behind him, hesitant but following. Preston felt something tighten in his chest at the sound. This woman had been through hell, yet she had the courage to trust a stranger because she had no other choice. That took more strength than most people possessed. The rain had intensified, turning the yard into a sea of mud. Margaret slipped halfway across, and Preston caught her elbow to steady her. She flinched at the contact but did not pull away. When they finally made it to the small ranch house, Preston pushed open the door and gestured for her to enter first. The interior was modest but clean. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting warm light across the single room that served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A ladder led up to a sleeping loft above. Preston had built most of it himself after buying the land 2 years ago, and while it was not much, it was home. "Sit by the fire," Preston said, moving to the stove where a pot of coffee sat keeping warm. "I will get you a blanket and some dry clothes." Margaret stood dripping on the wooden floor, looking around the space with wide eyes. "You live here alone?" "Just me and the horses," Preston confirmed, climbing the ladder to the loft. He rummaged through his trunk and pulled out one of his shirts and a pair of trousers. They would be far too large for her, but they were dry and warm. He also grabbed a thick wool blanket before descending. He handed her the bundle. "There is a privacy screen in the corner there. Change out of those wet things and wrap yourself in the blanket. I will turn my back." Margaret took the clothes with trembling fingers. "You are very kind." "I am just doing what any decent person would do," Preston said, turning to face the fire. He heard the rustle of fabric as she moved behind the screen, the sound of wet material hitting the floor. He kept his gaze firmly on the flames, giving her the respect she deserved. When she finally emerged, she looked almost comical swimming in his oversized clothes. She had rolled up the sleeves and pant legs, and the blanket was wrapped around her shoulders like a shawl. Her hair hung in damp waves around her face, and without the mud and terror obscuring her features, Preston could see she was beautiful. But more than that, there was a fierce intelligence in her eyes, a determination that spoke of inner strength. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair from the rough-hewn table. "I will pour you some coffee." Margaret sank into the chair gratefully, pulling the blanket tighter. Preston poured 2 cups of the strong black coffee and set one in front of her before taking the seat across the table. He wrapped his hands around his own cup and waited, giving her time to warm up and gather her thoughts. She took a sip of the coffee and closed her eyes in appreciation. "I cannot remember the last time I had something hot to drink." 3 days, you said." Margaret nodded. "I took a horse when I ran, but it went lame on the 2nd day. I had to let it go and continue on foot. I have been avoiding the main roads, staying off the path, sleeping wherever I could find shelter. When I saw your barn, I thought it was empty. I would not have trespassed if I had known." "How did you end up on a wagon train heading west?" Preston asked. He kept his voice gentle, not wanting to push, but needing to understand the full situation. Margaret stared into her coffee cup, her hands wrapped tightly around the warmth. "My parents died of fever last winter in Kansas. I was alone with no means of supporting myself. A man named Gerald Morrison presented himself as a respectable businessman looking for a wife. He seemed kind at first, proper. He paid for my passage on the wagon train and said we would marry once we reached Denver. I thought I was fortunate." The bitterness in her voice cut through the room. Preston felt anger kindle in his chest at the man who had deceived her. "But he was not kind," Margaret continued. "He started showing his true nature once we were on the trail. He was possessive, cruel when no one was watching. He would grab my arm hard enough to bruise and smile while he did it. Then 3 nights ago, he came to my tent after everyone else was asleep. He said I owed him for the passage, that I belonged to him. When he tried to force himself on me, I fought back. I hit him with a camp stool, hard enough to break his nose. Pride flickered across her face at the memory, quickly followed by fear. He started screaming that I had attacked him without cause, that I had stolen money from his belongings. The wagon master believed him. Men always believe other men. They were going to tie me up, take me to the nearest marshal and have me arrested or worse. I managed to slip away when they were securing the horses. I took the first mount I could reach and rode as hard as I dared in the darkness. "You did the right thing," Preston said firmly. Running was the smart choice. Margaret looked up at him, surprise evident in her expression. "Most men would call me a thief, a criminal." "Most men are fools," Preston replied bluntly. "You defended yourself against assault and escaped a situation where you had no protection under the law. That is not criminal, that is survival." Something in Margaret's expression shifted, a wall coming down just slightly. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me, I could be lying." Preston considered his words carefully. "I spent 3 years as a scout for the army before I bought this land. I saw what men are capable of when they think no one is watching. I learned to read people, to tell the difference between someone who is genuine and someone who is lying. You are telling the truth. And even if I had doubts, I would still offer you shelter. Leaving someone to suffer when you can help is not something I am capable of doing." Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes, the first real emotion beyond fear and determination that she had allowed herself to show. She blinked them back quickly, straightening her spine. "I will not burden you for long. If I could just stay until the storm passes, perhaps you could point me toward the next town. I will find work, make my own way. The next town is Julesburg, about 8 miles east. But you are not going anywhere tonight, and we will talk about what happens next in the morning when you have rested." Preston stood and moved toward the fireplace. "You can take the loft. I will bed down here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Margaret protested. "You can and you will," Preston said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You are exhausted and you need real rest. I have slept in far worse places than in front of a warm fire." Margaret looked like she wanted to argue further, but another shiver ran through her body, and she nodded reluctantly. "Just for tonight." Preston climbed the ladder and quickly stripped the bed, bringing down the blankets and pillow for himself. Margaret ascended slowly, her movements stiff and pained. He heard her settle onto the mattress with a soft sigh, and within minutes, her breathing had evened out into the deep rhythm of sleep. Preston made himself a rough bed by the fire and lay down, but sleep did not come easily. His mind kept circling back to the woman sleeping in his loft. He had told her the truth when he said he could read people. Margaret Wilson was genuine, brave, and stronger than she probably realized. The way she had held that pitchfork, ready to defend herself despite being terrified and exhausted, had struck something deep in his chest. He had known many people in his life, men and women alike, but few possessed that kind of courage. The storm raged outside, rain hammering against the roof and wind howling through the gaps in the walls. Preston stared into the fire, watching the flames dance and wondering what the morning would bring. He had lived alone for 2 years, preferring the solitude after the chaos of his army days. But now, with Margaret sleeping peacefully above him, the house felt different. Fuller somehow. More like a home than just a place to sleep. He finally drifted off as the storm began to subside, the rain fading to a gentle patter against the windows. Preston woke at dawn out of habit, the gray light of early morning filtering through the windows. He lay still for a moment, listening. He could hear Margaret moving around in the loft, the soft sounds of someone trying to be quiet. He stood and stirred the fire back to life, adding fresh wood until the flames crackled with renewed vigor. "Good morning," he called up. I am making breakfast if you are hungry. Margaret's face appeared at the edge of the loft, her hair mussed from sleep. She looked younger in the morning light, and Preston revised his earlier estimate of her age. She could not be more than 22 or 23, far too young to have already survived so much hardship. "Good morning," she replied. "I'm afraid I slept much later than I intended. I should be on my way." "Not until you have eaten," Preston said, already pulling out his cast-iron skillet. "And we need to talk about your plan. Running off without supplies or a clear destination is not going to end well." Margaret climbed down the ladder, still wearing his oversized clothes. She had somehow managed to make them look more presentable, tying a piece of rope around the waist of the trousers to keep them up. "I cannot stay here. It is not proper, and I have already imposed too much on your hospitality." Preston cracked eggs into the skillet and cut thick slices from a slab of bacon. Propriety is a luxury that people who are trying to survive cannot always afford. You need time to rest, to heal, to figure out your next steps. "I have plenty of space and more than enough work to keep 2 people busy if you are worried about earning your keep." "I do not understand," Margaret said, moving closer to the fire. "Why would you offer this? You do not know me." Preston flipped the bacon, considering his words. "I know enough. I know you are brave and resourceful. I know you have been treated poorly by someone who should have protected you. I know you deserve a chance to catch your breath and make decisions from a place of safety rather than desperation." He divided the food onto 2 tin plates and handed her one along with a fork. They sat at the table, and Preston watched as Margaret ate with the careful control of someone who had not had enough food recently. She did not gulp or rush, but he could see the hunger in every deliberate bite. "I worked as a seamstress before my parents died," Margaret said after a while. "I know how to cook and clean and manage a household. I even learned some basic medicine from my mother. If you truly mean your offer, I could work for you, as a housekeeper or cook or whatever you need. Just until I have enough saved to move on." "You have a deal," Preston said, extending his hand across the table. Margaret shook it, her grip firm despite her small hand disappearing in his larger one. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through Preston, something warm and electric that caught him off guard. From the way Margaret's eyes widened slightly, she had felt it too. They discussed practical matters while they ate. Preston explained his daily routine, the work that needed doing around the ranch, and the layout of the property. He raised a few head of cattle, kept horses for breeding and occasional sale, and did odd jobs for other ranchers in the area when they needed an extra hand. It was a modest living but an honest one. "There is a general store in Julesburg where you can get proper clothes," Preston said. "We can go tomorrow if the roads have dried enough. For now, there is plenty to do around here. The chicken coop needs mending, and I have been meaning to organize the tack room in the barn." Margaret nodded eagerly, clearly relieved to have concrete tasks. "I can start right away." They worked through the morning side by side, falling into an easy rhythm. Preston found himself impressed by Margaret's competence. She did not shy away from hard work or complain about getting dirty. When they tackled the chicken coop, she held boards steady while he hammered, offering suggestions for reinforcing the weak spots. Her hands were steady and sure, no longer trembling from cold and fear. By midday, they stopped for a simple lunch of bread and cheese. They sat on the porch of the ranch house, looking out over the land. The storm had cleared, leaving the world washed clean and bright. The Colorado sky stretched endlessly blue above them, and the plains rolled away to the distant mountains. "It is beautiful here," Margaret said softly. "Peaceful." "It is," Preston agreed. "That is why I chose this spot. After years of chaos and noise, I wanted somewhere quiet where I could hear myself think." You said you were an Army scout, Preston nodded. Enlisted when I was 18, got recruited for scouting work because I could track and knew the land. Spent 3 years doing that before I had my fill of violence and death. Bought this land with my savings and never looked back. Do you miss it? The excitement? Not even for a moment, Preston said honestly. There is nothing exciting about watching good people die for bad reasons. I would take the simple work of ranching over that any day. Margaret was quiet for a moment, picking at the crust of her bread. I thought my life would be simple. I would marry a good man, have children, grow old in the same town where I was born. Then fever took my parents and everything fell apart. Gerald seemed like the answer to my prayers, but he turned out to be a nightmare. I do not know if I can trust my judgment anymore. Preston turned to look at her fully. Your judgment was sound. You recognized that Gerald was dangerous and you took action. You did not stay and hope things would improve. You did not let fear paralyze you. You saved yourself, Margaret. That takes wisdom, not faulty judgment. Her eyes met his, and Preston saw gratitude there mixed with something else, something deeper that made his pulse quicken. Thank you, she said quietly, for understanding, for believing me. Always, Preston replied, and he meant it with an intensity that surprised him. The days began to blend into a comfortable routine. Margaret proved to be everything she had claimed and more. She was an excellent cook, transforming Preston's simple ingredients into meals that actually had flavor and care put into them. She mended his clothes, organized his chaotic storage, and kept the house cleaner than it had been since he built it. But more than that, she was good company. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit by the fire and talk. Margaret told him about her childhood in Kansas, about helping her mother with sewing work, and learning to read from her father, who had been a school teacher. Preston shared stories of his time as a scout, carefully editing out the worst parts, but giving her a sense of the landscape and the people he had known. He found himself looking forward to those evenings more than anything else in his day. The way Margaret listened with her full attention, the way she laughed at his dry observations about the world, the way she was not afraid to challenge him when she disagreed. She was whip-smart and well-read, and their conversations ranged from philosophy to practical farming techniques to their opinions on the latest news from the East. A week after Margaret's arrival, Preston took her into Julesburg to purchase proper clothes and supplies. The town was small but growing, serving as a stop for the railroad and a supply point for the surrounding ranches. Preston was known there as a fair dealer and a man who kept to himself, so when he arrived with Margaret, it caused some stir. They stopped at the general store first, a long wooden building packed with everything from fabric to farm tools. The proprietor, a jovial man named Samuel Green, greeted Preston warmly until he saw Margaret. Then his expression shifted to curious speculation. Preston Warner, as I live and breathe. And who might this young lady be? This is Miss Margaret Wilson, Preston said easily. She is working as my housekeeper. She needs proper work clothes and whatever supplies women need. Samuel's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline, but he was too much of a businessman to pry further when there was money to be made. Of course. Miss Wilson, if you will follow me to the dry goods section, we will get you fixed up properly. Margaret shot Preston a grateful look before following Samuel. Preston wandered the store, picking up items they needed for the ranch. Nails, a new saw blade, coffee beans, sugar, salt. He was examining a set of horse brushes when a voice behind him made him tense. Well, if it is not Preston Warner, still playing at rancher, I see. Preston turned to face Frank Daniels, a man he had known from his Army days. Frank had been discharged for drinking and fighting, and he now scraped by doing odd jobs and causing trouble. He was exactly the kind of person Preston had hoped to avoid by living outside of town. "Frank," Preston said neutrally, "what brings you to Julesburg? Same as you, I imagine. Supplies, gossip, maybe a drink later." Frank's eyes drifted past Preston to where Margaret was visible through the store, examining bolts of fabric. "That the woman everyone is talking about. The one who showed up at your place." Preston felt his jaw tighten. "Miss Wilson is my housekeeper. Nothing more interesting than that." Frank's grin was unpleasant. "Housekeeper. Right. Mighty pretty housekeeper to be living alone with a bachelor. Folks are going to talk, Preston. Might not be good for her reputation." "Then folks should mind their own business," Preston said coldly. "And you should remember that spreading rumors about a lady is a quick way to make enemies." The threat in his voice was clear, and Frank's grin faded slightly. "No offense meant, just offering some friendly advice." "Noted. Now, if you will excuse me, I have shopping to complete." Preston moved away before Frank could continue the conversation. His heart was pounding with anger, not at Frank specifically, but at the situation. Frank was right about one thing. People would talk about Margaret living at his ranch. In a small community like this, reputation mattered, especially for a woman. He needed to find a solution that would protect her without driving her away. When Margaret finished her shopping, Preston paid Samuel and helped carry her packages to the wagon. She had chosen practical items: 2 simple dresses suitable for work, a warm shawl, sturdy boots, and various smaller necessities. She had been careful with his money, choosing function over fashion, which Preston appreciated. As they loaded the wagon, Margaret noticed his tense expression. "Is something wrong?" Preston hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "A man from my army days was in the store. He made some comments about you staying at my ranch. I sent him packing, but the truth is, people are going to talk. I do not want that to cause you problems." Margaret's expression hardened. "Let them talk. I know the truth of my situation, as do you. That is what matters." "It matters to me that you are not subjected to gossip and judgment," Preston said. "You have been through enough without adding that burden." "Preston," Margaret said, touching his arm lightly, "I have survived far worse than small-minded gossip. I will not let fear of what people think dictate my choices. That is how I ended up with Gerald in the first place, trying to do what was expected rather than what was right." Her words struck a chord in Preston. She was right, of course. They had done nothing wrong, and he would not let town gossip drive away the best thing that had happened to him in years. Because that was what Margaret had become, he realized. Not just a housekeeper or someone he was helping out of obligation, but someone whose presence had transformed his lonely existence into something richer and fuller. They finished loading the wagon in silence, but it was a comfortable quiet. As Preston helped Margaret up onto the seat, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary at her waist, he felt that same electric current pass between them. Margaret's cheeks flushed pink, and she quickly settled into her seat, smoothing her skirts. The ride back to the ranch was pleasant, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Margaret asked him about the various landmarks they passed, and Preston found himself sharing stories about the land, the history of the area, the way the seasons changed the landscape. She listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions that showed she was truly paying attention. When they arrived home, they unloaded the wagon together. Margaret disappeared into the house to try on her new clothes while Preston tended to the horses. When she emerged wearing one of the new dresses, a simple blue cotton affair that actually fit her properly, Preston felt his breath catch. The dress showed her figure, the curve of her waist, the graceful line of her neck. But more than that, she looked happy, more relaxed than he had ever seen her. "It fits well," she said, spinning slightly to show him. "Thank you for taking me to town, for buying these things." "You earned them," Preston said, finding his voice. "You have worked hard." Margaret moved closer, her expression serious. "I need to tell you something. When we were in town, when that man made those comments, my first instinct was not fear or shame. It was anger that anyone would speak ill of you when you have been nothing but honorable. That is when I realized something had shifted for me. This ranch, this life, it does not feel temporary anymore. It feels like home." Preston's heart hammered in his chest. "Margaret, let me finish," she interrupted gently. "I know this is complicated. I know we have only known each other for a week. But I also know that I feel safer and more valued here than I have felt anywhere else in my life. You treat me like an equal, like someone whose thoughts and opinions matter. You have given me space to heal and recover without demanding anything in return. I just wanted you to know that I am grateful, that I do not take any of this for granted." Preston stepped closer, drawn by the honesty in her eyes. "I need to be honest with you too. When I found you in that barn, when you stood there with that pitchfork ready to defend yourself despite being terrified, something in me recognized something in you. You have courage, Margaret. Real courage, not the false bravado of men who have never truly been tested. This past week, having you here, it has shown me how lonely I had been without even realizing it. I do not want you to leave, not as a housekeeper or out of obligation, but because I have come to care about you, deeply." Margaret's eyes widened, hope and uncertainty warring across her face. "Preston, I care about you too, but I do not know if I can trust these feelings. Everything happened so fast with Gerald. What if I am making the same mistake?" Preston reached out and gently took her hands in his. "I am not Gerald. I will never force you or pressure you or make you feel like you owe me anything. If you need time, take it. If you want to leave and find your own path, I will help you do that. But I want you to know that you have a place here for as long as you want it. No strings, no expectations, just a genuine offer of home." A tear slid down Margaret's cheek, but she was smiling. "You are a good man, Preston Warner. I think I knew that from the first moment, even when I was too scared to admit it." "And you are an extraordinary woman, Margaret Wilson," Preston replied softly. They stood there, hands clasped between them, the moment stretching out sweet and full of promise. Preston wanted to kiss her, wanted to pull her close and show her exactly how much she had come to mean to him. But he held back, respecting the boundaries she needed. There would be time for more if she wanted that. For now, this was enough. The following weeks brought a deepening of their connection. They worked together during the day, their partnership growing more seamless as they learned each other's rhythms and habits. Margaret proved to have a gift with the horses, her gentle approach calming even the most skittish animals. Preston watched her one afternoon working with a young mare that had been traumatized by rough handling before he bought her. Margaret spoke softly, her movements slow and deliberate, until the horse finally allowed her to approach and stroke her neck. "You have a way with them," Preston observed. Margaret smiled, still focused on the horse. "They can sense fear and kindness. They respond to honesty, not so different from people, really." Preston thought about that as he watched her work. She was right. Margaret herself was proof of how people responded to genuine kindness after experiencing cruelty. She had blossomed in the safety of his ranch, her natural confidence returning day by day. In the evenings, they continued their tradition of sitting by the fire and talking. But now their conversations were interspersed with comfortable silences, moments where words were not necessary, because the simple act of being together was enough. Preston found himself watching Margaret in those quiet moments, memorizing the way firelight played across her features, the sound of her laugh, the graceful movement of her hands as she mended or knitted. One evening, about 3 weeks after Margaret's arrival, a rider approached the ranch just as the sun was setting. Preston tensed immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward his rifle. Strangers arriving at dusk rarely meant anything good. Margaret appeared in the doorway behind him. "Who is it?" "Stay inside," Preston said quietly. "Just in case." The rider came closer, and Preston relaxed slightly as he recognized Samuel Green from the general store, but the man's urgent expression put him back on alert. "Preston," Samuel called out, dismounting quickly. "I came to warn you. There are men in town asking about a woman. They match the description of Miss Wilson. They are saying she is a thief and a criminal, that they are looking to take her back to face justice." Margaret made a small sound of distress behind Preston. He turned to see her face had gone pale, her hands clutching the doorframe. "It is Gerald," she whispered. "He found me." Preston's mind raced. He had known this was a possibility, but he had hoped they would have more time. "How many men?" "3 that I saw," Samuel said. "The one doing the talking, a big fellow named Morrison, and 2 others who look like hired guns. They are asking around about you too, Preston. Figured they will find their way here soon enough." "Thank you for the warning, Samuel. I appreciate you riding out here." Samuel nodded. "Miss Wilson seems like a good woman. Did not sit right with me the way those men were talking. They do not have the law with them, Preston. This is not an official matter. They are planning to take her by force." "Over my dead body," Preston said flatly. "I was hoping you would say that." "You need any help, you send word. There are others in town who will stand with you." After Samuel left, Preston barred the door and checked his weapons. He had a rifle, a shotgun, and his pistol, plus ammunition for all 3. It was not an arsenal, but he knew how to use what he had. Margaret watched him with anguish in her eyes. "Preston, I cannot let you fight my battles. If Gerald wants me, maybe I should just go with him. I will not have your blood on my conscience." Preston crossed the room in 3 strides and took her by the shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. "Listen to me. You are not going anywhere with that man. Not now, not ever. He has no legal claim on you, and I will not stand by while someone takes you against your will. Do you understand? But he has hired guns. You could be killed. And you could be hurt or worse if I let you go. That is not an option I am willing to consider." Preston's voice softened. "Margaret, I meant what I said. I care about you. That means protecting you even if it is dangerous, especially if it is dangerous." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I care about you too. So much that the thought of you being hurt because of me is unbearable." "Then trust me," Preston said. "Trust that I know what I am doing and that I am not going to let anything happen to either of us." She nodded, swallowing hard. "What do? We prepare. If they come tonight, we will be ready." Preston spent the next hour securing the ranch house. He barred the windows, positioned weapons strategically around the room, and made sure they had water and supplies within easy reach. Margaret worked alongside him, her fear transforming into determined resolve. They did not have to wait long. Just after full dark, Preston heard the sound of horses approaching. He positioned himself by the window, rifle ready, while Margaret crouched behind the heavy wooden table he had turned on its side for cover. "Preston Warner," a voice called out from the darkness. "Send out the woman and we will leave peacefully." Preston recognized the entitled tone of a man used to getting his way. This had to be Gerald Morrison. "Miss Wilson is under my protection. She is not going anywhere. You are trespassing on my property. Leave now and we will forget this happened." Gerald's laugh was harsh and ugly. "You do not know what you are protecting, Warner. That woman is a thief and a whore. She stole from me and attacked me. I am just claiming what is mine." Rage flooded through Preston at the crude language. He fought to keep his voice level. "She is not yours. She is a free woman who defended herself against assault. You have no legal right to take her, and you have no moral right either. This is your last chance to leave." "We are not leaving without her," Gerald shouted back. "Boys, encourage Mr. Warner to see reason." Gunfire erupted, bullets slamming into the walls and shutters of the house. Preston returned fire, aiming carefully in the darkness. He was not trying to kill anyone, but he wanted them to know he was serious. One of the hired guns cried out, and Preston knew he had at least winged him. The gunfire continued sporadically for several minutes before falling silent. Preston could hear low voices conferring outside, arguing about their next move. He used the lull to reload and check on Margaret. She was pale but composed, her jaw set with determination. "Are they gone?" "No." "They are planning their next move." Preston moved back to the window. "But they know now that I will fight. That might make them reconsider." "Gerald is not the kind of man who backs down," Margaret said quietly. "His pride will not allow it." She was right. A few minutes later, Gerald tried a different approach. "Warner, be reasonable. I will pay you for her. Name your price." The suggestion that Margaret could be bought and sold like property made Preston see red. "The only price I am interested in is the cost of your life if you do not get off my land. You are making a big mistake protecting her. When the law catches up to this situation, you will hang right alongside her." "The law is not on your side, Morrison. You have no warrant, no legal authority. You are just a man who cannot accept that a woman said no. That makes you pathetic, not righteous." The words struck a nerve. Gerald screamed incoherently, and another volley of gunfire erupted. This time it was more sustained, and Preston realized they were trying to pin him down while one of them circled around to the back of the house. "Margaret, watch the back door," Preston called out. "Someone is trying to flank us." Margaret grabbed the shotgun Preston had positioned near the back entrance. She held it steady, her finger on the trigger, her eyes fixed on the door. Preston felt a surge of pride at her composure. She was not cowering or panicking. She was standing her ground. The back door shook as someone threw their weight against it. The bar held, but it would not last forever under sustained assault. Margaret raised the shotgun, aiming at the door. "On my count, step aside and let him through," Preston called to her. "Then shoot low." He positioned himself with a clear line of sight to the back entrance. The door shook again, the bar beginning to splinter. "Now!" Margaret stepped aside as the door burst open. A man stumbled through, pistol raised. Margaret pulled the trigger and the shotgun blast caught him in the legs. He went down screaming, his weapon clattering across the floor. Preston kicked it away and trained his rifle on the doorway, but no one else tried to enter. "How many more of you want to end up shot?" Preston shouted into the night. "Because I can do this all night." Silence greeted his challenge. Minutes stretched out, tense and fraught. Then Preston heard the sound of horses, their hoofbeats fading into the distance. He waited, not trusting that it was not a trick, but no more shots came. Finally, as the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Preston dared to peek outside. The yard was empty except for the wounded man still groaning near the back door. Gerald and his other hired gun had fled. "Stay here," Preston told Margaret. He approached the wounded man cautiously, kicking away the man's other weapons before checking his injuries. The shotgun blast had done damage but was not life-threatening if treated properly. Preston dragged him inside and tied him securely before tending to his wounds. The man was conscious but in too much pain to be a threat. "What is your name?" Preston demanded. Jake Miller," the man gasped. "Well, Jake, you picked the wrong side in this fight. Morrison and his other man abandoned you here. That tell you anything about the kind of loyalty he inspires?" Jake's face twisted with bitterness. He promised good money, did not say we would be going up against a man who knew how to shoot. Maybe next time do not take a job kidnapping women, Preston said coldly. He left Jake tied up and went to Margaret, who had finally lowered the shotgun. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Preston gently took the weapon from her and pulled her into his arms. "You were so brave," he murmured against her hair. "So incredibly brave." Margaret buried her face in his chest, her fingers clutching his shirt. "I was terrified. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what needs to be done despite being afraid. You did that tonight." They stood there holding each other as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Preston had never felt more protective of another person, had never felt such a fierce need to keep someone safe. He realized with crystal clarity that he had fallen in love with Margaret Wilson. Completely, irrevocably in love. When Margaret finally pulled back, she looked up at him with eyes that held the same realization. "Preston, I love you," he said before he could stop himself. "I know it has only been a few weeks. I know this is not how things are supposed to happen. But I love you, Margaret. Your strength, your courage, your kindness, everything about you." Tears spilled down Margaret's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too. I think I started falling for you that first night when you gave me your coat and believed my story without question. You saw me when I felt invisible. You made me feel valuable when I felt worthless." Preston cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them aware that this was a threshold they were crossing. But then Margaret's arms came around his neck, and she kissed him back with a passion that stole his breath. This was not the kiss of someone grateful for rescue. This was the kiss of a woman who knew her own mind and heart, who had chosen him as much as he had chosen her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me. I know it is fast, but I have never been more certain of anything. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night." "Marry me, Margaret." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They kissed again, sealing the promise between them. Outside, the morning continued to brighten, the world carrying on around them. But in that moment, nothing existed except the two of them and the future they would build together. Later that morning, Preston rode into Julesburg with Jake Miller bound in the back of his wagon. He went straight to the marshal's office and explained the situation. The marshal, a grizzled man named Tom Hendricks, listened carefully and examined Jake's wounds. "So Morrison and another gun are still out there," Tom said thoughtfully. "They are cowards who ran when faced with real resistance," Preston replied. "But I want this on record. Gerald Morrison tried to kidnap Margaret Wilson, who is my fiancée. He has no legal claim on her, and any future attempts to take her will be met with the same response." Tom nodded. "I will put out word to other jurisdictions. If Morrison is smart, he will leave Colorado entirely. Men like that usually do when their plans fall apart, and they have the law looking for them." Preston also stopped by the small church where Reverend Matthews presided. The Reverend was a kind man in his 50s who had been serving the Julesburg community for a decade. Preston explained that he wanted to marry Margaret as soon as possible, given the circumstances. "I had heard there was trouble at your ranch last night," Reverend Matthews said. "Samuel Green mentioned you might need support. It is handled for now, but I want Margaret to have the protection of marriage. I want everyone to know she is my wife and under my care." The Reverend studied Preston's face carefully. "Is this just about protection, son? Or is there more to it?" "I love her," Preston said simply. "That is the only reason that matters. The protection is a benefit, but I would marry her regardless." Reverend Matthews smiled. Then we will do this properly. Bring Miss Wilson to town tomorrow. We will have a small ceremony, and I will make sure the marriage is properly recorded." Preston returned to the ranch to find Margaret had cleaned up the damage from the night's fight and was preparing lunch as if nothing had happened. He told her about his conversation with the marshal and the reverend, and her face lit up with joy when he mentioned the wedding. "Tomorrow," she said, her hands flying to her face. "That is so soon." "Too soon?" Preston asked, suddenly uncertain. "No," Margaret said quickly. "Not too soon at all. I just wish I had something nicer to wear. Not that it matters, really. Marrying you is what counts." "We will get you something nice," Preston promised. "Whatever you want." The next day, they returned to Julesburg together. Preston took Margaret to the general store where she chose a simple but elegant dress in cream-colored cotton with delicate lace trim. It was not a traditional wedding gown, but when she emerged from behind the changing screen, Preston thought she had never looked more beautiful. Samuel Green insisted on closing the store for an hour to attend the ceremony. Word had spread quickly, and by the time Preston and Margaret arrived at the church, a small crowd had gathered. People Preston had worked with over the years, neighbors from surrounding ranches, townspeople who had heard about the attempted kidnapping and wanted to show their support. Even the marshal attended, standing in the back with his arms crossed and a rare smile on his weathered face. Reverend Matthews conducted a simple but heartfelt ceremony. Preston spoke his vows clearly, promising to love, honor, and protect Margaret for all the days of his life. When it was Margaret's turn, her voice rang out strong and sure as she pledged herself to him. "I take you, Preston Warner, to be my husband. I promise to stand beside you in joy and hardship, to be your partner and your friend, to love you with all that I am for as long as we both shall live." When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed his bride with tenderness and joy. The small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. For the first time since her parents died, Margaret was surrounded by community, by people who accepted her and celebrated her happiness. There was a modest reception at the saloon, which the owner had hastily cleared of gambling tables for the occasion. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was music and dancing. Preston held Margaret in his arms as they swayed to a gentle waltz, oblivious to everything except each other. "Happy," he murmured in her ear. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Margaret replied. "A month ago I was terrified and alone. Now I am married to the best man I have ever known, surrounded by people who have shown me kindness. It feels like a dream." "It is real," Preston assured her. "This is your life now, our life." They stayed in town overnight at the small boarding house, a gift from Samuel, who insisted on paying for the room as a wedding present. It was the first time they were truly alone as husband and wife, and Preston was mindful of everything Margaret had been through. "We can take this slowly," he told her as they stood in the small room. "There is no rush. I want you to feel safe with me." Margaret smiled and reached for him, pulling him close. "I do feel safe with you. That is why I am ready for this. I want to be your wife in every way, Preston. I want to give you all of myself, because I know you will treasure what I give." That night, they came together with tenderness and passion, discovering each other with wonder and care. Preston was gentle, attentive to Margaret's responses, making sure her first time with him was filled with pleasure and love rather than the fear and pain she had nearly experienced with Gerald. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Margaret's head on Preston's chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her. "I never knew it could be like that," Margaret whispered. "So beautiful and intimate and safe." Preston pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "That is how it should always be between two people who love each other. I will spend every day of our lives making sure you feel cherished, Margaret. That is my promise to you." They returned to the ranch the next day, and life settled into a new rhythm. Margaret was no longer a guest or an employee but Preston's wife, his partner in building their life together. She had a natural head for the business side of ranching, keeping meticulous records of expenses and profits, corresponding with buyers for their cattle and horses. Preston had always been more comfortable with the physical work, so their skills complemented each other perfectly. Within a month, they had fallen into such an easy partnership that Preston could hardly remember what his life had been like before Margaret. She anticipated his needs without him having to ask, and he learned to read her moods and offer comfort or space as required. They worked together, ate together, made love together, and built something solid and real from the foundation of their shared values and growing affection. 3 months after their wedding, Margaret confirmed what they had both suspected. She was pregnant. Preston's joy was boundless. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing with delight. "We are going to be parents," Margaret said, her eyes shining. "I can hardly believe it." "Believe it," Preston said, setting her down gently. "In about 6 months, our family is going to grow." He became even more protective, insisting that Margaret not overexert herself. She tolerated his fussing with amused patience, continuing to work as she always had while being mindful of her condition. As her belly grew, Preston would often place his hand there, marveling at the life they had created together. "Boy or girl?" he asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I do not know," Margaret replied, "but healthy, I hope. With you as a mother, any child of ours will be strong and brave," Preston said. The baby arrived on a cold December night, 6 months after Margaret had discovered she was expecting. The local midwife, Mrs. Callahan, attended the birth while Preston paced outside, driven nearly mad by the sounds of Margaret's labor. When Mrs. Callahan finally emerged and told him he had a son, Preston nearly collapsed with relief. "Margaret," he asked urgently, "tired but well. Go meet your boy." Preston entered the bedroom to find Margaret propped up against pillows, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. Her face was pale and exhausted, but she had never looked more beautiful to him. She looked up as he approached, her smile radiant. "Preston, meet your son." Preston carefully took the baby, cradling him with the same care he would use handling the most precious and fragile thing in the world. The baby had a shock of dark hair and Margaret's delicate features. His tiny fist waved in the air, and Preston felt his heart expand with a love so intense it was almost painful. "He is perfect," Preston whispered. "You are amazing. You did so well." "We need to name him," Margaret said. They had discussed names for months without reaching a decision. But looking at his son's small face, Preston suddenly knew. "Thomas, after my father. Thomas Preston Warner." "Thomas," Margaret repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world." The first year of Thomas's life was filled with the chaos and joy that came with a new baby. Preston discovered reserves of patience he had not known he possessed, walking the floor with a crying infant in the middle of the night, learning to change nappies, marveling at every small milestone. Margaret bloomed as a mother, her natural warmth and competence extending to caring for their son. They hired a young woman from town, Emma Davis, to help around the ranch a few days a week, so Margaret could focus on the baby. Emma was 19, cheerful and hardworking, grateful for the employment and the chance to learn ranching skills from Preston. Life was good, better than Preston had ever imagined it could be. The ranch was prospering, his family was healthy, and he woke each morning next to the woman he loved more than life itself. There were challenges, of course. Thomas was a colicky baby who did not sleep well for the first few months. The winter that year was harsh, testing their resources and endurance. But they faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. When Thomas was 18 months old, Margaret discovered she was pregnant again. This time she was more confident, having been through it before. Preston was no less protective, but had learned to channel his concern into practical support rather than hovering. Their daughter was born on a warm spring evening, arriving faster than Thomas had and with far less drama. She was tiny and perfect, with Preston's blue eyes and a surprisingly loud cry for such a small person. "Emily," Margaret said, holding her daughter for the first time. "I want to name her Emily Margaret Warner, after your mother." Preston asked. Knowing that Margaret's mother had been named Emily, Margaret nodded, tears in her eyes. "I wish she could have met her grandchildren. Wish my father could have walked me down the aisle at our wedding, but this feels like a way to honor them." "Emily is a beautiful name," Preston agreed. "For a beautiful girl who is going to grow up to be as strong and brave as her mother." With 2 young children, the ranch became even more lively. Thomas was a curious toddler who wanted to be involved in everything his father did. Preston fashioned a small saddle for the gentlest horse and would take Thomas riding around the property, the little boy squealing with delight. Emily was a quieter baby than her brother had been, content to watch the world with solemn blue eyes. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, Preston and Margaret stood on their porch watching Thomas chase chickens while Emily napped inside. Preston wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "Remember when we met?" he asked. "How could I forget? I was terrified, soaked, and threatening you with a pitchfork." Preston chuckled. "I fell in love with you in that moment. Your courage, your determination not to be a victim, the way you stood your ground even though you had to be exhausted. I knew then that you were extraordinary." Margaret turned in his arms to face him. "You saved me, Preston, not just from Gerald or the storm, but from a life of fear and desperation. You showed me what love should look like, what a true partnership could be. You gave me a home, a family, a future I never thought I would have." "You saved me too," Preston said seriously. "I did not realize how lonely I was until you filled that emptiness. You made my house a home, my life have meaning beyond just survival. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you." They kissed as the sun set over the Colorado plains, their children playing nearby, their ranch thriving around them. The Wild West was slowly being tamed, civilization creeping westward with the railroad and telegraph lines. But here, on their small piece of land, Preston and Margaret had built something that would endure. A family, a legacy, a love story that had started with a frightened woman in a barn and a cowboy who saw her courage and fell instantly. 2 years later, when Thomas was nearly 4 and Emily just past 2, Margaret gave birth to another son. They named him James, and he proved to be the easiest of their 3 children, sleeping through the night almost from the beginning and smiling at everyone he met. The ranch continued to prosper as Preston's reputation for breeding quality horses spread throughout Colorado and beyond. Thomas showed an early aptitude for working with animals, often following his father around and mimicking his gentle handling techniques. Emily was quieter but fiercely independent, insisting on doing things herself even when she was clearly too small. James was the charmer, winning hearts with his ready smile and cheerful disposition. Preston expanded the house, adding 2 more rooms upstairs for the children and enlarging the kitchen and living areas. It was no longer the modest bachelor cabin where Margaret had first taken shelter, but a proper family home, filled with laughter and love and the organized chaos that came with raising 3 young children. When Emma Davis married a young rancher from a neighboring spread, Preston and Margaret hosted the wedding at their ranch. It had become the custom over the years for their home to serve as a gathering place for the community. Margaret's warmth and hospitality made everyone feel welcome, and Preston's steady presence provided a sense of security and reliability. Life was not without its challenges. There were droughts that tested their water supplies, winters that killed livestock, and the constant struggle to keep a ranch profitable in an increasingly competitive market. But Preston and Margaret faced everything as they had from the beginning, as partners united by love and mutual respect. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Preston arranged for Emma to watch the children so he could take Margaret into Denver for a proper celebration. It was the first time they had been away from the children overnight, and while Margaret worried the entire journey, she also reveled in the rare opportunity to have Preston's undivided attention. They stayed at the finest hotel in Denver, a luxurious establishment that seemed impossibly elegant compared to their rustic ranch house. Preston bought Margaret a beautiful dress for dinner, sapphire blue silk that matched her eyes. They dined at a fancy restaurant, attended the theater, and spent a night of passionate lovemaking in the privacy of their hotel room, free from the worry of being interrupted by a crying child. "This is wonderful," Margaret said as they lay together the next morning, sunlight streaming through the hotel windows. "But I miss them." "Is that silly?" "Not at all," Preston replied, pulling her closer. "I miss them too. That is what it means to be a parent. They are part of us now, part of our hearts. We can enjoy time alone, but we will always be thinking of them, wanting to share experiences with them." "Do you ever regret it?" Margaret asked. "Taking me in that night. Your life was simple and uncomplicated before I showed up." Preston rolled over to look at her directly, his expression serious. "Not for one single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Margaret. You and our children. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." She kissed him softly. "I love you, Preston Warner. More than words can express. I love you too. Always and forever." They returned to the ranch the next day to find their children healthy and happy, but clearly relieved to have their parents home. Thomas threw himself into Preston's arms while Emily clung to Margaret's skirts. James, barely a year old, crawled toward them as fast as his little legs could carry him. The years continued to pass in a blur of activity and growth. The children grew older, each developing their own distinct personalities and interests. Thomas became his father's shadow, learning everything Preston could teach him about ranching, horses, and the land. He was serious and responsible, even as a young boy, taking his role as oldest sibling seriously. Emily proved to have her mother's gift for numbers and organization. By the time she was 8, she was helping Margaret keep the ranch accounts, and had already started showing an interest in the business side of their operation. She was also fearless, much to Preston's concern, climbing trees and riding horses with a recklessness that reminded him of Margaret facing down danger with a pitchfork. James inherited his father's easygoing nature and his mother's social charm. He made friends easily, and even at a young age, had a gift for smoothing over conflicts and making people feel at ease. He was not as interested in ranching as Thomas, showing instead a fascination with books and learning that suggested he might pursue a different path than his siblings. When Thomas turned 10, Preston began teaching him to shoot and hunt, passing on the skills that had kept him alive during his scouting days. Margaret watched these lessons with mixed feelings, proud of her son's growing competence but worried about the dangerous world that required such knowledge. "He needs to know how to protect himself and his family," Preston said one evening after a particularly successful hunting trip. "The West is safer than it was, but it is still wild. I want him to be prepared." "I know," Margaret replied. "It just makes me realize how quickly they are growing up. Soon enough, they will not need us anymore." Preston pulled her into his arms. "They will always need us, just in different ways, and we will have each other long after they have grown and made lives of their own. That is the blessing we built, Margaret. A love that began with just the two of us and expanded to include our children, but never lost its center." Margaret looked up at him, her eyes still as full of love as they had been on their wedding day. "You are right, as always." "I would not go that far," Preston said with a smile. "But thank you for the sentiment." When Thomas turned 15, Preston began to seriously discuss the future of the ranch with him. Thomas was capable and skilled, ready to take on more responsibility. They talked about expansion, about breeding programs for the horses, about the possibility of bringing in cattle on a larger scale. Margaret listened to these conversations with pride, seeing her husband passing on his knowledge and legacy to their eldest son. Emily, at 13, had become indispensable to the running of the household and the business side of the ranch. She managed the accounts with skill that exceeded even Margaret's, finding ways to maximize profit and minimize waste. She had also inherited her mother's compassion, often riding into town to help families in need, bringing food or supplies without fanfare or expectation of thanks. James, at 11, remained the family's heart and social center. He had a gift for storytelling, entertaining his siblings and parents with elaborate tales of adventure and heroism. Preston and Margaret recognized that he was different from his older siblings, his talents lying in areas that had nothing to do with ranching. They encouraged his love of learning, buying him books whenever they could afford them, and discussing the possibility of sending him to school in Denver when he was older. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston and Margaret renewed their vows in the same small church where they had married. Their 3 children stood beside them as witnesses, along with friends and neighbors who had become family over the years. Reverend Matthews, now in his 70s, conducted the ceremony with the same warmth and sincerity he had shown a decade earlier. 10 years ago, I married these 2 young people who had found each other under unusual circumstances, the Reverend said. I have watched them build a life together based on love, respect, and partnership. They have raised 3 fine children, contributed to this community, and demonstrated every day what it means to honor the vows they took. It is my privilege to witness them renew those promises today. Preston took Margaret's hands, looking into the eyes of the woman who had transformed his life. Margaret, 10 years ago I promised to love, honor, and protect you. I have tried to keep that promise every single day, but what I did not realize then was how much you would do the same for me. You have protected my heart, honored my dreams, and loved me with a generosity that still takes my breath away. I renew my vows to you today with the same certainty I felt then, but with a depth of knowledge about what those vows truly mean. I am yours, now and always. Margaret squeezed his hands, tears streaming down her face. Preston, you saved my life that stormy night when you found me in your barn. But more than that, you gave me a reason to live, a purpose, and a love I had never dared to dream possible. You have been my partner, my protector, my best friend, and the love of my life. I renew my vows to you with a heart full of gratitude and love. I am yours, now and always. They kissed to thunderous applause from their friends and family. Thomas stood tall beside his father. Emily clung to her mother's arm, and James beamed at everyone, clearly enjoying the celebration. After the ceremony, there was a party at the ranch that lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and an abundance of food. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Preston and Margaret slipped away to their favorite spot on the porch. They sat together on the swing Preston had built years ago, watching their children play with the other kids in the fading light. "A good day," Preston said, his arm around Margaret's shoulders. "The best," Margaret agreed, "though every day with you is good. Even the hard days, especially the hard days," Margaret said, "because we face them together. That is what makes the difference. I am never alone anymore, Preston. Even when I am physically by myself, I carry you with me. Your love, your support, your belief in me. That is what you gave me, beyond the shelter and safety. You gave me the knowledge that I am valued and loved exactly as I am." Preston pulled her closer. "You gave me the same gift. I was existing before you came into my life, but I was not truly living. You showed me what it meant to have a real home, a true partner. Everything good in my life comes from you." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. The sounds of laughter and music drifted from inside the house where the party continued. This was their life, Preston thought. This community they had helped build, these children they had raised, this love they had nurtured for a decade. It had all started with a woman seeking shelter and a man who recognized her courage. The years continued to unfold with the usual mixture of joy and challenge. Thomas grew into a young man who was the image of his father, tall and strong with Preston's blue eyes and steady temperament. At 18, he was fully capable of running the ranch on his own, though he never made decisions without consulting his parents. He had inherited Preston's gift with horses and had begun developing his own breeding program that was gaining attention from buyers across Colorado. Emily, at 16, had become a formidable young woman. She had her mother's beauty and her father's strength, combined with a sharp intellect that intimidated many of the young men who came calling. She had no interest in the traditional path of early marriage, instead focusing on expanding her knowledge of business and ranching. Margaret recognized her daughter's fierce independence as an echo of her own younger self and encouraged Emily to pursue her ambitions. James, at 14, remained the family's emotional center. He had grown into a thoughtful young man with a gift for words and a passion for justice. He talked about becoming a lawyer, about using his talents to help people who could not help themselves. Preston and Margaret supported this dream, even though it meant James would likely leave the ranch for education and a career elsewhere. When Thomas was 19, he fell in love with Sarah Mitchell, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. She was a sweet-natured girl with a practical streak that matched Thomas's own temperament. Preston and Margaret approved wholeheartedly, seeing in Sarah the qualities that would make her a good wife and partner for their son. The wedding was held at the Warner Ranch, now a substantial spread that had grown considerably over the years. It was a joyous occasion that brought together families from all over the region. Preston walked Sarah down the aisle alongside her father, having grown close to the Mitchell family over the years. Margaret cried happy tears as she watched her oldest child marry his sweetheart. After the wedding, Thomas and Sarah moved into a small house Preston had built for them on the far side of the ranch property. Thomas continued to work alongside his father, now truly as a full partner in the ranching operation. Within a year, Sarah was expecting their first child, and Preston and Margaret prepared to become grandparents. Their first grandchild, a boy they named Preston Thomas Warner after both his grandfather and father, arrived on a crisp autumn morning. Preston held his tiny namesake and felt the circle of life complete in a way that was both humbling and beautiful. Margaret cooed over her grandson, marveling at the perfection of his small features. "We started all this," Margaret said to Preston one evening as they watched Thomas and Sarah settling into parenthood. "That night in the barn, we could not have imagined this. A ranch, children, grandchildren, a whole life built from nothing but courage and love. You built it with your courage, Preston corrected gently. I just recognized it and gave it space to flourish. You are the foundation of everything good in this family, Margaret. Never forget that. Emily left for Denver when she was 18, determined to learn business and finance from the best teachers available. It was difficult for Margaret to see her daughter go, but she understood Emily's need to forge her own path. They corresponded regularly, and Emily returned home for visits, always bringing news of the changing world beyond their ranch. James followed his sister to Denver 2 years later, entering law school with a passion and determination that made his parents proud. He wrote home frequently, sharing stories of his studies and his growing commitment to using the law to help those without power or privilege. With Thomas settled with his own family and the 2 youngest children pursuing their dreams, Preston and Margaret found themselves in a new phase of life. They were not yet old, both still in their early 40s, but the intense work of raising young children was behind them. They had time to focus on each other again, to reconnect as a couple beyond their roles as parents. Remember when we renewed our vows? Margaret asked one evening as they sat on the porch swing, a ritual they had maintained for years. Of course. How could I forget? I meant every word I said that day, Margaret continued, but I did not fully understand then how much deeper love could grow. After everything we have been through, raising children, building this ranch, facing challenges and celebrating triumphs, I love you even more now than I did then. I did not think that was possible, but it is. Preston brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I feel the same way. Every day I discover something new to love about you. The way you mother our children, the way you run this household, the way you still make my heart skip a beat when you smile at me. We have built something extraordinary, Margaret, not just this ranch or our family, but the relationship between us. That is our real legacy. They sat in peaceful silence, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The ranch spread out before them, a testament to years of hard work and careful planning. In the distance, they could see Thomas's house, smoke rising from the chimney where Sarah was likely preparing supper for her family. Their grandson would be crawling now, exploring his world with fearless curiosity. You ever think about Gerald Morrison? Margaret asked suddenly. Wonder what happened to him? Preston considered the question. They had never heard anything more about the man after that night he tried to take Margaret. Sometimes. I hope he found some measure of peace, though I doubt he was capable of it. Men like that usually destroy themselves eventually. But I am grateful to him in a strange way. If he had not shown his true nature, if you had not run, we never would have found each other. I prefer to think we were meant to find each other, Margaret said. That all the pain and fear I experienced was leading me to you. That night in the barn, when you offered me shelter without judgment or expectation, that was when my real life began. Everything before was just prelude. Then I am grateful for every moment that led us to each other, Preston replied. Even the hard ones, because they brought us here. As the years continued to pass, Preston and Margaret watched their children build their own lives and families. Thomas and Sarah had 3 children of their own, 2 boys and a girl, who kept the ranch loud and lively with their play. Emily returned from Denver after 5 years, bringing with her a quiet accountant named Michael Chen, who she had met while working at a financial firm. Their marriage was a quiet affair, just family, but the love between them was evident to everyone who saw them together. Michael proved to be a perfect match for Emily. He appreciated her fierce independence while providing the steady support she needed. They settled in Julesburg, where Emily opened a business helping other ranchers manage their finances and plan for the future. She was extraordinarily successful. her reputation for honesty and competence spreading throughout Colorado. James became a lawyer as he had always dreamed, but instead of pursuing wealth and prestige, he opened a practice serving the poor and disadvantaged. He married a woman named Anna Robertson, a teacher he met while defending a case involving her school. They settled in Denver but visited the ranch regularly, bringing with them a passion for social justice that inspired the whole family. Preston and Margaret grew older gracefully, their hair turning gray, their faces acquiring the lines that came from years of laughter and sun. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger as they faced the challenges of aging together. When Preston developed arthritis that made working difficult, Margaret was there to help him adjust. When Margaret had a scare with her heart, Preston nursed her back to health with tender devotion. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. All three of their children were there with their spouses and children. Grandchildren ran everywhere, filling the house with noise and joy. Friends and neighbors came to pay their respects to the couple who had become pillars of the community. Reverend Matthews, now retired and quite elderly, made a special trip to offer a blessing. 25 years ago, I married two young people who had found each other under extraordinary circumstances. I have had the privilege of watching them build a life that has blessed not just themselves but this entire community. Their love has been an example to all who know them, demonstrating what is possible when two people commit to each other with honesty, respect, and genuine affection. May God grant them many more years together. Preston stood to address the gathered crowd, Margaret at his side. 25 years ago, I found a woman sheltering in my barn. She was frightened and desperate, but she faced me with a pitchfork in her hands and courage in her eyes. In that moment, I fell in love with her. Everything good in my life has flowed from that night. Margaret, you have been my partner, my lover, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. Thank you for choosing me, for building this life with me, for making every day an adventure and a blessing. Margaret stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. Preston, you gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. But more than that, you gave me a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that has sustained me through every challenge and every joy. You saw me at my worst and chose to see the best in me. You have been my rock, my safe harbor, my greatest blessing. I love you more today than I did 25 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise, now and always. They kissed to thunderous applause, their children and grandchildren cheering, their friends and neighbors celebrating with them. The party continued late into the night, filled with music and dancing and storytelling. Preston danced with Margaret, with his daughters-in-law, with his granddaughters, his heart full to bursting with gratitude for the life he had been given. As the party wound down and the guests began to leave, Preston and Margaret found themselves back on their beloved porch swing. Their children and grandchildren were sleeping inside the house, filling every available space. The night was quiet and cool, the stars brilliant overhead. 25 years, Margaret mused. Where did the time go? Into building something beautiful, Preston replied. Into raising good people who will carry on our values, into loving each other every single day. You remember what you told me that first night, when I said I would leave as soon as the storm passed, Preston smiled. I told you that you could stay as long as you wanted. That you had a home here. You did, and you kept that promise. This has always been home, not because of the land or the house, but because you were here. You made me feel safe and valued and loved. That is what home really is. Preston pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body against his. I love you, Margaret Warner, today, tomorrow, and forever. I love you too, Preston Warner, always. They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built a love story for the ages. The Wild West was changing, becoming more settled and civilized, but here on their ranch, surrounded by the family they had created and the community they had helped build, Preston and Margaret had found something timeless. Their love had started with a woman's courage and a man who recognized it, and it had grown into a legacy that would endure for generations. The moon rose higher, casting silver light across the ranch. Inside the house, their children and grandchildren slept peacefully, secure in the love that had created them. Preston and Margaret remained on the porch, reluctant to end this perfect day, content to sit together in the peaceful silence that only came from years of shared life and deep understanding. Eventually, as midnight approached, they went inside to their bedroom. They prepared for bed with the comfortable familiarity of a couple who had shared thousands of nights together. Preston watched Margaret brush her long hair, now streaked with gray but still beautiful to him. She caught his eye in the mirror and smiled, that same smile that had captured his heart so many years ago. They climbed into bed and Preston pulled Margaret close, her back against his chest, his arm around her waist. This was how they slept every night, wrapped together, connected even in sleep. "Preston," Margaret said softly into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for finding me, for saving me, for loving me. Thank you for having the courage to trust me, for building this life with me, for loving me back." "Always," Margaret whispered. "Always," Preston echoed. They drifted off to sleep together, as they had for 25 years, as they would for all the years remaining to them. Their love story, which had begun with a desperate woman seeking shelter and a cowboy who saw her courage, had become the foundation for a family, a legacy, and a life well lived. It was a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of partnership, and the enduring nature of true love. And it all started on one stormy night in a humble barn in Colorado, where two souls found each other and changed the course of their lives forever.